actually, the more I think about it, the more I realize that the Cinelume dub's portrayal of Faragonda and Bloom's relationship does remind me a lot of the Farah Dowling and Bloom Peters relationship in Fate the Winx saga. Farah is just straight up keeping all of these secrets from Bloom up until Bloom confronts her about it at the end of season 1 of Fate. And it's very similar to the original Cinelume English dub, it seems. Hey there, welcome to the Winx Forever podcast. I'm Lola, creator, host, and lifelong Winx fan. I'm taking a deep dive into the very cool universe of Winx Club. So join me each week as we rewatch and discuss each episode starting with season 1 of the original series. So whether you've been a Winx fan since 2004 like myself, or you vaguely remember the show from your childhood, or maybe if you're even being introduced to it for the first time, I want to say welcome. This is the Winx Forever podcast. Hello, my very fabulous friends. I am Lola Valentine, and this is the Winx Forever podcast. We are diving back into our Winx Club Season 1 rewatch with episode 15 of the original series. If you are new here, we are going through Season 1 of the original Winx Club series and comparing the two different English dubs, the Cinelume dub, which was the original English dub that is the closest to the Italian version of Winx Club, and the first American English version of Winx Club dubbed by the 4Kids Entertainment Company. Now, a lot of people say that this episode is more of a slice of life episode, which is rather funny to me since there's a lot of plot building in this episode too, and it's not just a mundane filler episode as other slice of life episodes can get. That's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the original 3 seasons of Winx Club is that they did a really good job of making even the filler episodes somehow pertinent to the storyline and development of characters. So with that, let's get into the episodes, starting with the title and synopsis for Season 1, Episode 15. The Italian title for Season 1, Episode 15 is Voci del Passato, Voices from the Past. The Cinelume title is titled Honor Above All, and the 4Kids title is titled Pushing the Envelope. 4Kids would do a lot of funny and popular phrases or sayings in English for their titles. So for this episode, to push the envelope actually means to surpass normal limits or attempt something viewed as radical or risky. It comes from the aeronautical use of envelope, referring to performance limits that cannot exceed safety. So there's a lot of different phrases and such that 4Kids lends from English to develop their titles. Of course, a lot of the 4Kids dubs are also the same as the Cinelume dubs. This is a perfect example of an episode where it doesn't have the same title as its Italian counterpart. The synopsis for this episode reads, Bloom runs into Wizgiz, who drops a sealed envelope which contains the answers for a test. Bloom takes the envelope to her friends should they open the envelope and get all the questions and answers. LOL. That's a very vague synopsis and not all of what actually ensues in this episode. So let's just dive in scene by scene. So it opens up with all of the students in their respective classes, and in Professor Wizgiz's class, the students are all looking very frustrated and perplexed. Then Wizgiz tries to reassure his students by saying that it's just a little quiz, you know? He apparently has dropped this huge bomb on them that this is a quiz that he is going to administrate the next day and that they all need to start studying for. The students argue slightly against Wizgiz's quote-unquote little quiz, but he does not budge in rescheduling the quiz and reminds them that the quiz will be over materials they should have already reviewed. It's really funny to me in the Cinelume dub, they don't really stress how dramatic Wizgiz has made this test out to be, because in the 4Kids dub, Stella explains that Wizgiz had just mentioned that if they don't pass this test, if they fail this test, they will be kicked out of Althea. Harsh, probably. Very dramatic, absolutely. So Wizgiz quickly packs his things and leaves the classroom, and the rest of the fairies remaining in the room are complaining to each other about the quiz and how they need to study when they hear snoring coming from Bloom. Bloom has fallen asleep on her desk, and Flora wakes up Bloom, and Bloom drowsily, asks what's wrong. And all the other students are laughing at her because Bloom is pointed out by Luna, one of her classmates, and Luna gives Bloom a mirror to look at Bloom's face, and so Bloom sees that she'd fallen asleep on her notes, and so she had writing, ink on her cheek, which I think that that's a very cute little scene, especially engaging with the background characters that we don't get to see a lot. The girls that were talking about being nervous in the test after class let out in the 4Kids dub, they were saying how, none of them had been taking notes all semester, and that they were all going to get kicked out when they failed this test, when they noticed that Bloom was asleep on her desk on her own notes. And to this, Bloom, it's all the same, roughly the scene, but the dialogue is changed because Musa chimes in and says, yo, at least we know Bloom's been taking notes, which I think is a very funny line and something really fun for Musa to add to the conversation. I think that 4Kids did a really good job with this episode of making it maybe a little more modern and a little more, honestly, just American, with their dialogue changes and the ways that they approached these conversations. But then Griselda comes in and questions why, everyone's laughing, and then she notices that Bloom has been using her desk as a bed and orders Bloom to come to the headmistress's office with her. Once in Faragonda's office, Bloom apologizes for her behavior and explains the situation to Faragonda, that she keeps getting woken up by this voice of Daphne, the nymph. And though Griselda tries to dismiss Bloom's excuses, Faragonda seems to understand and believe Bloom. She calmly tells Bloom that it is all right and that she can return back to her dorm to get some rest. So Bloom leaves, and Griselda, and then Faragonda is left to kind of pensively look out her window and make the note that she feels that it's time to reveal more or another part of Bloom's past to her. First off, in this scene in Faragonda's office, I love Faragonda just giving Griselda the hand in the scene. Griselda was literally about to start in on her when Faragonda was just talk to the hand. We're not going over this. I've made my mind. I love it. What a confident headmistress. We love Faragonda. But also the advisory committee, hello, that was not a part of the 4Kids dub that I grew up with. She just straight up tells Griselda that she needs to be left alone in the 4Kids dub. I mean, it's still iconic, but that was just a very funny omission, I think, of the 4Kids dub, in my opinion. Also, it's very interesting to me that Faragonda in the Cinelume dub already knows about Bloom's past and just straight up says that it's time for Bloom to learn more about her past, as if Faragonda is already clued into what and who Bloom is. I don't think that I really appreciate this approach to Bloom and Faragonda's relationship, because in the 4Kids dub, while Faragonda might have a few more pieces to the puzzle than Bloom knows or understands yet, she's still piecing it together with Bloom and also with the audience, just little by little. Actually, the more I think about it, the more I realize that the Cinelume dub's portrayal of Faragonda and Bloom's relationship does remind me a lot of the Farrah Dowling and Bloom Peters relationship in Fate the Winx saga. Farrah is just straight up keeping all of these secrets from Bloom up until Bloom confronts her about it at the end of season 1 of Fate. And it's very similar to the original Cinelume English dub, it seems. Whereas in the 4Kids dub of the original Winx Club series, they portray Bloom and Faragonda's relationship as more nurturing and caring. Faragonda is intrigued by Bloom's past, sure, but she, just like all of the rest of the audience along with Bloom, is uncovering it piece by piece. I think her little moment in the office after Griselda leaves in this scene is actually a lot better of a, thinking out loud, reflective moment for Faragonda instead of the Cinelume dub's dialogue here. Also, LOL. Faragonda definitely looks like a Who from Whoville in this shot for some reason. What the heck? You are listening to the Winx Forever podcast. So Bloom is on her way back to her dorm from Faragonda's office when she runs into Professor Wizgiz, and he appears to be kind of like in a tizzy, like he's just kind of distraught looking for something. He's frantically searching the area of the hallway where they both are, and he opens his bag up and starts kind of just strewing things everywhere. And all of these things that fling out of his bag, one of them was an envelope that just kind of gingerly floats to the ground. When Bloom sees this, she picks up the paper, and while Wizgiz seemingly, gives up looking for whatever it was he lost, Bloom turns around to give him the thing that fell out of his bag, and he's gone. He's like nowhere to be found. Like, just straight up disappears. Dude, we thought that you were a transformation professor, not a, illusions disappearing professor. Hello? So before Bloom has really a chance to hand it to him, obviously he's disappeared, and she's slightly confused and tries to, look for him a bit before she realizes that this envelope contains the answers to Wizgiz's huge test that is the next day. I absolutely love this scene. It's really funny to watch the Cinelume dub and see Bloom picking up a just straight up blank envelope and then, just automatically knowing that it's the answers to the quiz. Like, girl, that could be anything inside of that envelope. Like, how do you know that it's the answers to the test? Because that's something that I really appreciated in the 4Kids dub, that they did add some text to the envelope that said Wizgiz quiz answers on the front of it. That way there was no question as to what Bloom found. Something also very funny about the differences between the Cinelume dub and the 4Kids dub is that Bloom's run-in with Wizgiz doesn't happen until after we go back to the Winx's dorm and see what the other girls are up to after Bloom's visit to Faragonda's office. It shows Flora trying to break the spell on Myrta, the pumpkin, and the other girls giving Flora a hard time about it. Then it brings us back to Bloom on her way to the dorm when she runs into Wizgiz. You'll notice this a lot with the 4Kids dub, that they kind of rearrange scenes in the original series to kind of help the story flow a little better. Some of the flack that 4Kids gets is that it is a very different show from the original Italian and even the original English Cinelume dub. But honestly, I am biased with, the 4Kids dub because I grew up with it, but also it's just the way that they reimagined it and reworked kind of these sequences of events in these episodes really does give it a better flow, in my opinion, and it's not clunky. It feels like it's to me it's like the Italian and Cinelume versions were a first draft And then the 4Kids team took it and polished it up and made it a final version. You know what I mean? Like, in my mind, that is how I view kind of the dubs. And then we won't talk about the Nickelodeon version because we just try to mentally block that era out. So back at the Winx's dorm, Flora tries to help Myrta by breaking the spell, and she's verbalizing the incantation, and all it does is sparkle and release a dark yellow mist around the pumpkin on the table that is Myrta. Musa snaps at Flora, accusing her of being an incapable fairy who cannot even bring Myrta back to her human form. Flora reciprocates the same attitude back to Musa, claiming that she cannot distinguish a carrot from a pumpkin. Then Musa taunts Flora back and says that, that Musa could try. And Flora obviously snaps right back as well and is like, you should try because, I'm the only one here trying to break this spell on Myrta. Kiko then tries to take a bite out of the pumpkin, but then Tekna kind of warns him that, like, he shouldn't even try that. And with Myrta defending herself against the bunny, who wrapped her vines around his little bunny ears and lifts him up in a way to, like, scold him, But then Bloom enters the dorm and sees all of the girls in the hallway, with Myrta on the table. And Flora explains that they were trying to break the curse, but to no avail. Then Bloom joyfully explains that they do not need to study anymore because she had the answers to the pop quiz right there. And all of the girls are like kind of shocked, honestly. And, well, all of them are shocked except for Stella, who seems like almost too excited about the news. They then place the envelope on the coffee table in their little common area, and they all sit around it contemplating, what should they do with it. Stella, after failing Palladium's class, obviously can't afford to fail Wizgiz's tests and suggests that they should open it, sure. Honestly, I really did enjoy the way that the 4Kids dub transitioned from the scene of Bloom finding the envelope to then it lying on the coffee table in the Winx's dorm room, with all of them around it debating on whether or not they should open it. To me, that moved the story along quicker and just overall, better, in my opinion. In the 4Kids dub, Stella starts to open the envelope and says that thinks that it's a golden opportunity, so she's not going to open it with her hands, she's going to open it with her thoughts. But then Tekna says that once Wizgiz finds out that they cheated, that they'll all get thrown out of the school, to which Stella retorts that she's going to get thrown out anyway if she bombs the test. Since, as I mentioned earlier, Wizgiz at the beginning of the 4Kids dub of this episode had told his class that they were going to get kicked out of Althea if they fail this test the next day. But then Tekna reasons that, cheating is not the answer in the Cinelume dub, and that even though Stella knows that it is wrong, she wants to bring her average up. Flora advises that cheating is not a celebratory action in completing a task. And Stella still somewhat wants to open it when Musa says that, Bloom should have left it where it was because this is too much of a temptation and it's extremely overwhelming. Whereas in the 4Kids dub, Musa actually said that, not only is it too tempting, but they could get quote unquote busted just for having it in their possession, which 4Kids Musa is not wrong, they could just get in trouble just for it being, in their dorm. So they're obviously still, trying to decide what to do with the envelope when Stella suggests, opening it and then giving the answers to the rest of the class. Flora obviously disagrees, and Stella asks, what she would do. And Flora replies that studying is the best option and that they should forget about the envelope, which, yeah, probably that is what you should do. But in the 4Kids dub in this scene, Stella actually suggests that they only read the questions so that they know what to study for. And Flora is like, oh, come on, Stella, how is reading the questions not cheating? And Stella's like, what do you mean, how is it not cheating? I love any season 1 interactions between Stella and Flora. I think that they're so good, but especially in the 4Kids dub, because I think that both of them just have so much sassier attitudes in the 4Kids dub, and I love it. So Musa agrees with Flora on the sentiment of they should just forget about the envelope and study, but she yawns and then suggests that she's going to, go to bed first and take a nap. But Tekna points out that Bloom has already beat her to it because she is passed out in the armchair. She's like just so tired, Bloom is now dreaming about Daphne again and is awakened by Griselda, who is, kind of looming over her chair in her dorm room. And Griselda notifies Bloom that Faragonda has summoned her back to her office. And how long could that have been? Like not even 30 minutes that she was just in the office? Like how quick of a meeting did Faragonda have with the council committee, or what did she call it? The advisory board? I don't know. Anyway, so Bloom goes back to Faragonda's office and Faragonda welcomes her in. And so after being seated, Faragonda explains that the advisory committee has made an important decision. But before Faragonda could finish explaining, obviously her guilty conscience got the best of her because Bloom quickly defends herself, saying that she had not even opened the envelope. So Faragonda is, pretty confused by this because she's like, what do you mean by that exactly? And Bloom, kind of quickly changes the subject. Or like, oh, did I say that? Did I say envelope? I meant, what were you saying about the advisory committee? So Faragonda then, finishes what she was trying to say and saying that the voice that Bloom has been hearing consistently is Daphne, one of the 9 nymphs of Magix, and was the guardian of the dragon's flame, the power that created the magical dimension. So then Faragonda explains to Bloom that she's going to take her on an astral journey to learn more about her past, which is crazy because, Bloom is probably over here like, what is she talking about? How does she know about my past, And we don't really get a lot of that feeling from Bloom in the Cinelume dub. So Faragonda and Bloom are projected into the depths of Lake Rakaluche, and Faragonda takes Bloom into a cave in which Daphne, or her spirit rather, dwells. Though Bloom is hesitant at first, Faragonda encourages her to take a step forward to the bright light that begins to emanate at the end of the cave. As Bloom walks closer, Daphne appears before her and hands her a treasure box, which is containing a crown. Bloom takes it, and with that concludes the whole astral journey. So now they're both back at Althea, and Faragonda is obviously completely exhausted from using all of her energy, but clearly Bloom wants to know more. Like, it was just getting good, and then they were ripped back to reality. But, Faragonda advises that the rest of the discovery must be done by Bloom herself. The way that this scene played out in the Cinelume dub and the original dub, honestly, it didn't do it for me. Like, I really do appreciate how this whole scene played out in the 4Kids dub. It was just, there was a lot more dialogue, for one, that helped the story progress a little better, in my opinion. Instead of meeting with the school's advisory board, quote unquote, Faragonda tells Bloom that she had just met with the elders of Magix, which I believe is a much bigger deal than meeting with a school advisory board. This has to do with, the municipality of the whole city of Magix, because this has to do with one of their, beloved 9 nymphs of Magix. So, of course, she went to go meet with the elders of Magix. That makes total sense to me. Faragonda also doesn't mention to Bloom in the 4Kids dub that she is going to reveal anything to her about her past, but instead only shares that if the Daphne from Bloom's dreams is indeed the Daphne of Dragonfire legend, that, quote unquote, you might be more than you think that you are, which is just so much more, I don't know, it's just so much more mysterious. It's Faragonda not confirming that she knows much about Bloom's past, but she's also on this journey of discovery with her, and it's very enlightening. I really like it. So then Faragonda and the 4Kids dub proceeds to explain to Bloom that she's going to take her on an astral journey, and then begins to instruct Bloom on how to use her powers to focus on the exercise by saying, "Close your eyes and open your heart and connect to your Winx." You might recognize the first part of that sentence from the 4Kids dub theme song, which is no surprise that the writers of the 4Kids dub took that inspiration from the dub's theme to make it all connect. And then, of course, connecting to your Winx in the 4Kids dub means to simply connect to your powers, since in the 4Kids dub, the word Winx is assigned a meaning, and that meaning is that is their source of power, which I just absolutely love that. And like I said, in this scene of them going to Lake Racaluche, they did insert in the 4Kids dub a lot more dialogue, especially in the scene with Daphne. Daphne, talks during Bloom's journey and says, that this is the Ember Tiara. It was for the Crown Princess of Domino. Of course, it's called Sparks in the 4Kids dub. And that the dragon fire still burns deep within, ... She was then cut off by Faragonda not having enough strength or power to muster to continue the astral projection. So, Daphne didn't get to finish telling Bloom that the dragon fire still burns deep within Bloom, because that is where Daphne placed it, in Bloom. So that was the differences between the astral journey that Faragonda and Bloom took together to Lake Racaluche. Enjoying the show? Be sure to follow Winx Club podcast on your preferred streaming platform so that you're notified when the new episodes are released. So clearly, frustrated and probably having more questions now than she did before this astral journey, Bloom leaves Faragonda's office and returns to her dorm when she is just, off the bat, just bombarded with all of these questions regarding the envelope by Techno, Musoflora, and Stella. Bloom laughs at it because it was nothing, that they thought it was. They thought that she was getting in trouble for the envelope. So Stella then questions, well, then why were you called into Faragonda's office again? And Bloom just, kind of pushes it off as, well, it's because I keep falling asleep in class. But then Musa's like, well, that's not as big as the deal. Now we have to deal with, our actual problem of what to do with this envelope. So all the girls are studying. Bloom is in her dorm room studying, while Kiko is sitting next to her just chomping away at a pencil. And Bloom cannot concentrate. Her thoughts are mostly bombarded by, Daphne the nymph, but also about the last time that she saw Brandon with blonde hair, when they ventured into Cloud Tower's archives a few episodes ago. So she's a little sad that she, has not been contacted by Brandon with blonde hair since then, and she really wants to talk to him when Kiko suggests that she should call him herself. And so Bloom's like, oh, Kiko, that's a great idea. I'm going to call him. And then Sky doesn't answer because his phone is in his dorm room. And he's not there. And she just figures it's because, Brandon with blonde hair thinks that Bloom is a witch due to the Trix's trap at the Cloud Tower archives, and scolds Kiko for giving her bad advice to call him. He's just a bunny. Leave him alone. But in actuality, Brandon was not ignoring Bloom in this instance, at least. I cannot speak for any other time that she was calling him, between that episode and this episode. But Brandon with blonde hair was actually sparring with Riven on school grounds, and left his phone in his dorm room. Okay, I cannot with all of this kooky music while Bloom is trying to study. Like, what is that? I cannot believe that this soundtrack to the Cinelume dub, and I guess it's the soundtrack to the original Italian too, because they have basically the same soundtrack. Like, it's rough. I cannot. I'm laughing so much. Like, it is so campy. It's so cheesy. Oh my God. Also in the 4Kids dub, Kiko doesn't tell Bloom to call Brandon with blonde hair. She thinks to herself, that maybe she should call Brandon and ask for his advice. Although she called him already once yesterday and he hadn't called back. And then she thinks to herself, I can't be the girl who calls twice, can I? But I love that. I love that thought process because we've all been there. We've all had that same exact thought process before. Don't be the person that calls twice. Also, which I thought was very interesting and probably just a mess up in the scripting for the Cinelume dub, but when Bloom mentions her and Brandon's trip to Cloud Tower, she actually calls Cloud Tower Torre Nuvola, which is the name of Cloud Tower in the Italian version. I thought that was just a funny little tidbit. So now it's nighttime, and Tecna, Musa, Flora, Stella, and Bloom are walking down the hallways of Althea towards the kitchen. Perhaps out of fear that they will get caught, Stella reads the sign to the kitchen as danger because it looks like it's a chef's hat with some, chef utensils like in an X. And she's like, there's a danger sign on that door. But Musa obviously exasperately corrects her and is like, that means kitchen. So since, no one's in the hallways, no one can see what they're doing, Bloom decides to hide the envelope in the pantries in the kitchen. And so they all go into the kitchen and they're all looking for a good place to hide it. And Bloom is looking at the food pantry, and I can't with the Cinelume dub here. I don't even know. Bloom's like, I've always thought of fairies as creatures of pure spirit, but looking at this yummy food, literally, what kind of line is that? What does that even mean? I'm screaming. What is that? I genuinely am confused by this. So in the Cinelume dub, Stella suggests that they should hide the envelope in the turnips because nobody likes turnips except for Flora. And so they all decide to hide it there. The dialogue in this scene of, the Winx hiding the envelope made a lot more sense to me in the 4Kids dub because Musa makes up the very good point of, if we all hide the envelope, won't we all know where it is? And Bloom says, oh, that's a good point. Like, in that case, only one of us should hide it. Everyone else has to wait outside in the hallway. And then Tecna chimes in and is like, yes, but then won't the one person hiding it know where it is? Then Stella suggests that all the Winx, decide who gets to hide it by drawing straws when Musa chimes in and says, nah, forget about all of that. Like, I just say we let Bloom hide it. And then Flora is like, poor Flora, she's like, well, why does Bloom get to hide it? And then Bloom kind of defends herself by saying, because, no matter what happens, I've chosen that I won't look. And then she even doubles down on that and says, I pinky swear, promise you guys, which I don't know if the pinky promise relates across, the world, but basically it's a secret promise handshake that little kids use with their little small pinky finger, your fifth finger, I guess. They cross their pinky fingers together, interlocking them, and then shake on the agreed upon terms. That's what a pinky promise is. I don't know. It's very cute. If you didn't know what a pinky promise is, there you go. But then Stella says that Flora is just upset because she wants to be the group's resident quote-unquote goody-goody, which I find to be absolutely hilarious. And it gives us another layer of complexity to the story other than just discussing Flora's love for turnips in the Cinelume dub. After that, they all head to bed. However, each one of them could not sleep. They're all tossing and turning, and they couldn't resist the temptation to all sneak back into the kitchen to find the envelope and read the answers. As they are sneaking around the kitchen trying to locate the envelope in the dark, Stella had hit her leg against something and was trying not to scream, so she found a place to, hide and, rub her leg where it hurt. And Flora was kind of hiding with her, although she didn't know that Stella was in there. As were, all of the girls very surprised that once the lights were turned on by Bloom, that they were all in there together. Stella and Flora are shocked to see each other. Tecna looks near the trash can but falls into it instead as she was startled, and Musa, of course, is hiding behind an open cabinet door, only to be uncovered, once Bloom turns on the lights. Also, can we talk about, just for 1 second, the version of the Magic Winx song? It's like this jazz lounge version, and I am crying. Why is this so absolutely cringe? I hate it so much. And I am so sorry to anyone who grew up with this and loved this dub, but I cannot stand this. I'm sorry. What? The jazz, singing in this version. It's so bad. It's so not good. So Bloom obviously is laughing at all of the other girls because of the looks on their faces. And they all return back to the dorm, and Flora puts the envelope in her, end table beside her bed. And all the Winx agree to leave it there until they can return it to Wizgiz in the morning, and they all go back to bed. The morning arrives, and the girls are standing in front of Wizgiz's class, and Musa is scared to go in, to which Flora points out that Musa is a straight-A student and gets the best grades out of everyone in their group. But Musa admits that she did study but had always hated pop quizzes. Bloom tells them to stop complaining, considering the two of them always make the highest marks, and Tecna then tells the girls that they should probably go in now, and they were already going to be late. So Tecna opens the door and walks in, but then stops abruptly, extremely shocked about what she sees in the classroom. Stella ends up bumping into Tecna, and Flora asks, why is everyone stopped? What is going on? And Tecna tells them to take a look, and they see their fellow classmates, just looking very irritated and messy. They all have mud on their faces. And Bloom teases Amaryl because Wizgiz's class was supposed to be fun. Why are they looking so gloomy? Wizgiz then arrives and smirks at his well-worked plan. Amaryl is clearly frustrated and demands an answer when Flora is prompted to tell Wizgiz about the envelope that they found and hands it back to him. So Wizgiz thanks Flora and says that he will open it in front of all of them. And as he's about to open it, the other students that are not the Winx Club, the ones with all the mud on their faces, they're kind of, scared a little bit, and they freak out, and they kind of cowered back a little bit in their desk. And Wizgiz is still wearing a smirk on his face and asks, oh, what's wrong? Why are you afraid if it's just a little envelope? And all the students duck, and Wizgiz finally opens it, and a beautiful just display of golden sparks burst out of it, and all the girls panic. But Wizgiz now says that they can finally begin their lesson because their test is over. Which, of course, this just sends Amaryl through the roof, and she's like, wait. What do you mean? She asks in an irritated tone. Then Wizgiz reveals that he was teaching them a lesson about honesty, and that he put the envelopes near the students' dorms, tricking them into thinking it was the answers for the pop quiz. And if they opened it, the evidence would be right on their face, which determined the results of their quiz scores. Which meant that Stella and the rest of the Winx passed, and she was so happy that she, hugged Wizgiz and threw him up in the air, and then accidentally dropped him. Stella, maybe don't pick up your professors. Maybe let's not do that. That seems a little rude. We know you're excited, girl, but let's keep them on the ground. When I was watching this episode in the Cinelume dub, I was really confused because, Wizgiz, Professor Wizgiz, doesn't he teach transformations? Why is he teaching about fairy ethics? Shouldn't Professor Dufour be teaching lessons about honesty? It seemed rather just out of place to me. Whereas in the 4Kids dub, Wizgiz actually gives a lecture about how in class they talk a lot about how to transform on the outside, like with your appearance, and not about the ways that you can transform on the inside as well.
The pop quiz, to open the tempting envelope or not. Though it was more a lesson than a quiz, in class we talk a lot about outer transformation. What we don't talk about is the way you can transform on the inside. Like say you're the type of person who could never cheat, but you find the answers to a test and you can't resist. Suddenly you've transformed into a cheater. All right then. The path ahead is going to be filled with many obstacles, young ladies. But it's important to remember who you are and stay true to that, no matter what. You can't let challenges from the outside transform who you are on the inside. If you do, you might lose yourself entirely along the way.
So at the end of this episode, Griselda then comes into the classroom to make an announcement on their upcoming parent-teacher meeting. And then Bloom is devastated to hear the news because she had always hated parent-teacher meetings. The way that this episode ends in the Cinelume dub deeply, deeply confuses me. A parent-teacher conference? Hello? Bloom's Earth parents can't even attend because they are literally humans and humans cannot cross the barrier into magics. They literally said the first day at Althea that they can't. Anyways, moving on. That obviously wasn't in the 4Kids dub that I grew up with. And actually, in the 4Kids dub, they decided to add the first scene of episode 16 as the last scene of episode 15 to make it more of a cliffhanger leading into the next episode instead of just, it ending with Bloom being distressed over a random mention of a parent-teacher conference that literally never gets brought up again. Okay. So the 4Kids dub ends with Icy, Darcy, and Stormy conjuring the nightmare monster that will go after the Winx in the next episode. When Winx Club first aired in America in the early 2000s, it was on a Saturday morning cartoon program on a local access channel so that new episodes would only air once a week, every Saturday morning. So it makes sense to me why a serialized show, such as season 1 of Winx Club, would want to switch the scenes of the first part of the next episode into the last scene of this episode, because it makes it more intriguing and it makes kids want to tune in to next week's episode. So I personally, and this could be absolutely nostalgia talking, and I, am the first one to hand up, like, yes, I am biased, but it does just make it flow better. And I think that a lot of the changes that 4Kids made to the dialogue and even the scene arrangement in this episode helped it along and helped portray the story better. So that is the end of season 1, episode 15. Some major events that happen in this episode. Obviously, a little bit more is revealed about Bloom's past. We know that she might be royalty because Daphne, handed her this crown in her astral projection. But then also, Stella is saved from expulsion by passing the quiz. And we also learned that Misa and Flora are the ones to get the best grades of the Winx Club in classes. And a little trivia for you, this episode's plot and lesson are similar to that of the Saved by the Bell, the college years episode titled A Question of Ethics. So Saved by the Bell was a beloved live action sitcom. It featured best friends that went through high school and college together. And yeah, it does have a very, very similar plot to that episode of Saved by the Bell college years. So very fun. And as always, at the end of every episode rewatch, we are naming the Winx Forever moment, which is deciding which scene in this episode was just the most quintessential Winx-tastic moment of the episode. And to me, I loved the girls going around and, you know, trying to decide what to do with the envelope. It seemed very Winx to me because obviously they wanted to open it, but they knew it was wrong, and that every one of the girls shared kind of like a little bit of their personality of like, you know, their reasoning with it, which I think was really cool. So that would probably be the Winx Forever moment for me. A runner-up would be them all sneaking around in the kitchen in the 4Kids dub, because I never want to hear that jazzy "We Are the Winx" version of that song ever again, because that was the worst part of the episode for me in the Cinelume dub. But them sneaking around in the kitchen was super fun because the coloring in the first 3 seasons of Winx Club when it's nighttime is just so cinematic to me, and I love it, and it just makes me so happy. So yeah, that is the end of this episode. I hope that you guys are enjoying these rewatch episodes. I know that this one was technically a filler episode, but it is one of my absolute favorite episodes in season 1. Funny enough, I think that any slice of life episode we get of the Winx Club is just very magical and special to me. So I hope that you enjoyed it. Until next time, I am Lola Valentine, and this is the Winx Forever podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Winx Forever podcast, be sure to follow or subscribe on your preferred streaming platform to be notified when new episodes drop. You can join in on the conversation when you follow at Winx Forever Podcast on social media. The theme for the Winx Forever podcast is the song She Makes Magic by Big Wild. Here's what's coming up next week on the Winx Forever podcast. I cannot wait to dive into this episode of the original Winx Club series, but I think that we need a little bit of help with this episode. So, welcome to the show, fantasy writer, indie author, and YouTuber, but most of all, Unicorn of War, Thomas Vaccaro. Thomas, thank you so much for being on today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Do we count that as canon? Are we counting that as canon?
There are like 5 million different canons with this show, Lola. I don't know what to tell you. Everyone's working with different material.
Yeah, you're right. That seems like such a Trix move of like, oh, okay, cool. You captured them, but you didn't let them fall to their demise. I don't understand you. I thought you were witches.
Maybe it's just because the censors are like, no, you can't commit murder. This is a children's show. And actually, now that I think that out, I'm like, I guess murder is the worst thing on the table. So I guess.
Then explain season 4. Thomas, why? Season 4.
I don't have an answer for you. I don't.
I hope you'll join us next week for a special episode of the Winx Forever podcast.